My mother used to say that some children are born ready and some need more time. She said it the way people say things they believe completely, the way you say the sky is blue or water is cold. She said it at the dinner table, in front of both of us. And my sister would keep eating like she hadn't heard anything at all. I was 11 the first time I understood what she actually meant. My sister and I are not twins. We are 14 months apart. But in our house, we were always compared as if we had been born on the same day, handed the same opportunities, and only one of us had done something useful with them. My sister got straight A's. My sister won the spelling bee in 4th grade. My sister was going to be a doctor, or a lawyer, or something that sounded impressive at church. I liked to cook. I liked to watch cooking shows on Saturday mornings and try to recreate things with whatever was in the pantry. My mother called it a waste of time. I am 31 now. I own a restaurant, not a food truck, not a catering side business, not a pop-up, a real restaurant with 42 seats, a liquor license, a wait list on weekends, and a review in a local magazine that used the word exceptional twice. I did not get here because my mother believed in me. I got here because one person did, and that person was my grandmother. My grandmother lived 40 minutes away in a house that smelled like coffee and lavender and something faintly metallic from the cast iron pans she never stopped using. Her name was Mildred, and she called me by a nickname nobody else used, a shortened version of my name that felt like it belonged only in her kitchen. Every other Sunday, my mother would drop me off while she took my sister to enrichment programs, SAT prep, piano lessons, whatever the current investment was. I think my mother believed she was doing me a favor by leaving me behind. What she was actually doing was handing me the only education that was ever going to matter to me. My grandmother taught me how to make biscuits from scratch when I was 9. She stood behind me and guided my hands without taking over, which is harder than it sounds. She let me fail. She let me make biscuits that came out dense and pale and edible only if you were desperate. Then she said, again, and we did it again. By the time I was 12, my biscuits were better than hers, and she said so, clearly, in front of my mother, and my mother said, "That's sweet. The way you say something means nothing." I want to be careful here, because this is not a story about hating my mother. I spent a long time in my 20s thinking it was. I spent a long time believing the story was about her choices, her favoritism, her specific and terrible blindness to anything in me that wasn't a grade or a test score. But it is not her story. It never was. It is mine. And the thing about telling your own story is that you get to decide where it starts and where it ends and what the middle actually meant. Here is what the middle meant. I graduated from high school with a 2.8 GPA and a letter of acceptance to a culinary program 2 states away in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had applied without telling anyone. I had saved money from 3 years of babysitting and 1 summer of working at a sandwich shop where the manager, a tired woman named Ms. Peters, taught me more about food cost and inventory than I probably deserved to learn at 16. I had a plan. It was not my mother's plan, but it was real, and I had built it myself, and I was proud of it in the quiet way you are proud of something you know someone else is going to try to take apart. My mother sat across from me at the kitchen table when I showed her the acceptance letter. She read it twice. Then she set it down. "Charlotte," she said. "Yes, for cooking." "Culinary arts," I said, which I knew was a distinction she would not honor, but I said it anyway. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at the letter again. Then she said, "Your sister is applying to pre-med programs. Did you know that?" I did know that. My sister had been talking about it for 2 years. My mother had been talking about it for longer than that. "I know," I said. "I just think," my mother started, and then she stopped. And then she started again. "I just think you should consider whether this is a practical choice." I left for Charlotte 6 weeks later. My grandmother drove me. She did not ask my mother's permission to do this. She simply showed up with her car and helped me carry my things to it. And when my mother stood in the driveway looking like she was deciding whether to make a scene, my grandmother said, "We'll call when she gets settled," and got in the driver's seat. It was the most powerful thing I had ever seen a person do with complete quietness. The culinary program was 2 years. I worked in restaurant kitchens on the weekends, starting as a prep cook and slowly moving up by being willing to stay late and ask questions and take the bad shifts nobody else wanted. I was not the most talented person in my program. I want to be honest about that. There were students who had a natural instinct. I had to manufacture through practice. But I was consistent. I showed up. I took feedback without falling apart, which is a skill that sounds small until you are in a professional kitchen at 11 o'clock on a Friday night, and a chef is telling you in front of 6 people that your sauce broke. I graduated. I got a job at a mid-level restaurant in Charlotte as a line cook. I worked there for 3 years. I saved money with a discipline that surprised even me, tracking every expense in a notebook I kept on my nightstand. Eating staff meal instead of going out, living with 2 roommates longer than was comfortable because the alternative was slowing down. I was not living a glamorous life. I was building one. During those 3 years, my grandmother called every Sunday. My mother called occasionally, usually to tell me what my sister was doing. My sister was in her 2nd year of medical school. My sister had matched with a good residency program. My sister was getting married to a man who was also going to be a doctor. I listened to all of it. I said, "That's wonderful. I'm glad for her because I was." My sister and I had a complicated relationship built mostly around our mother's comparisons, but I did not blame my sister for being good at what she was good at. She had never asked to be the measuring stick. Then my grandmother had a stroke. It was not a severe stroke. She recovered. But she was slower afterward and tired more easily, and the drive to Charlotte felt too long for her, and our Sunday calls got shorter. I drove home for Christmas that year and sat in her kitchen, and we made biscuits together, and she watched me more than she helped. She said, "You've gotten very good." I said, "You taught me." She said, "I gave you the starting point. What you did after that was yours." I went back to Charlotte and I started writing a business plan. It took 8 months. I rewrote it 4 times. I met with a small business advisor through a local SCORE chapter, a retired restaurant owner named Howard, who had opinions about everything and delivered them without softening, which was exactly what I needed. I applied for an SBA loan. I was rejected. I revised the plan. I applied again. I was approved for enough to lease a space in a neighborhood that was transitioning. Not fully there yet, but moving in the right direction, with foot traffic that was increasing and rent that was still reasonable. I signed the lease on a Tuesday afternoon in October and sat in the empty space for 20 minutes by myself before I called anyone. I called my grandmother first. She cried a little, quietly, the way she did things. I called my sister second, which surprised even me. But my sister said, "I always knew you'd do something real." And I believed her, and it was the first uncomplicated moment we had shared in a long time. I did not call my mother. She found out through my sister. I don't know exactly what my sister told her. What I know is that my mother called me 3 days later and said, "I heard about the restaurant." I said yes. She said, "Are you sure this is what you want?" And I said, "I signed the lease, Mom." There was a pause. Then she said, "I hope it works out." It was not congratulations. It was the closest thing she knew how to offer, and I took it for what it was and let it go. Opening a restaurant is not a romantic experience. The renovation ran over budget by $11,000. My general contractor disappeared for a week during a critical phase, and I had to find someone else mid-project. My liquor license application was delayed by 3 months because of a paperwork error that took 6 weeks to identify. I hired my first kitchen staff and immediately lost 2 of them before we opened, one for a better offer, one for personal reasons I never fully understood. I had weeks where I was running on 5 hours of sleep and 1 meal a day, and a level of anxiety I managed by writing lists compulsively and cleaning already clean surfaces. We opened on a Thursday. I chose Thursday because weekends felt like pressure I didn't want, and I wanted our first real service to have some breathing room. We had a soft opening for friends and family. My grandmother came. She wore her good cardigan and she sat at the table nearest the kitchen window, and she ate everything I put in front of her. And when the dinner was over, she found me in the kitchen and held both my hands and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Mildred would be proud." She used her own name, talking about a version of herself from earlier, and I understood what she meant. My sister came with her husband. They were warm and genuine, and watching them in my restaurant felt strange and good in equal measure. My mother did not come. She said she had a prior commitment. I said I understood. I did not make it a bigger thing than it was, at least not out loud. Inside, it was a bigger thing. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. But I had learned by then that waiting for my mother's acknowledgement was a choice I kept making, and like any choice, I could make a different one. The restaurant found its footing slowly and then all at once, the way these things tend to go. We got a mention in a local food blog after our second month. A reviewer came in quietly 4 months after that, and the piece ran 6 weeks later and brought in a different kind of customer. People who drove from across town, people who made reservations instead of walking in, people who sent their compliments to the kitchen in ways that still, even now, take me a moment to receive gracefully. By the end of our first year, we were consistently full on weekends. We hired 2 more servers and expanded the kitchen team. I started paying myself a real salary, which sounds like a small thing and is actually enormous. My grandmother's health declined again in our second year. It was gradual and then faster. I drove home as often as I could. I sat in her kitchen even when she was too tired to cook, just to be in the room with her. She asked me about the restaurant constantly, about specific dishes, about difficult customers, about what I learned about managing people. She listened the way she always had, completely, without waiting for her turn to talk. She died on a Tuesday morning in March. I was with her. The grief was its own kind of weight. I am not going to minimize it by moving past it too quickly. I missed her every day and I still miss her, and the missing has changed shape, but it has not disappeared. What I will say is that in the months after she died, something clarified for me. Something about what I was doing and why I was doing it and who I was doing it for. I had started the restaurant partly for myself, and partly, honestly, for her. And now it was entirely mine, and the only way to honor what she had given me was to keep building. I had not spoken to my mother in 8 months when she called me in September of that year. I knew it was coming eventually. My sister had been careful with me. Not pushing, just staying in contact, and I appreciated it more than I said. When my mother called, I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to the message, which was careful and a little stilted, like she had practiced it. She said she wanted to reconnect. She said she had been thinking about things. She said she hoped we could talk. I waited 3 days. Then I called her back. The conversation was not a movie moment. There was no tearful apology, no admission of specific wrongs, no scene where we held each other and forgave everything. She said she had been proud of me in her own way, and I heard the truth in that, which was complicated. She said she had made mistakes, which cost her something to say. I said I appreciated her saying it. I said I was doing well. I told her about the restaurant, the second-year numbers, the expansion I was considering for the back dining room. She said, it really worked out. Not quite what I would have written for her, but real. More real than a scripted apology would have been. I invited her to come see the restaurant. She came on a Saturday afternoon in early October, before the dinner service, when the place was quiet and I could actually show her things. She walked through slowly. She looked at everything. She stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment and watched the prep team working. My sous chef, a woman named Celeste who had been with me from the beginning and who knew my whole story, gave her a nod that could have meant anything, and probably meant everything. My mother sat at the bar and I made her coffee and we talked for 2 hours. Not about the past, mostly, about the present, about the restaurant, about food, about what my grandmother used to cook. My mother said, your grandmother always believed in you more than she believed in anyone. I said, I know. She said, I didn't understand it then. I said, I know that too. Before she left, she stood at the door and looked back at the room, the table set for dinner service, the soft lighting, the chalkboard menu I still write by hand every week. She said, you built something real here. That is the closest thing to what I had waited for. Not an apology, not a reversal of everything that had happened, just acknowledgement, plain and honest, that what I had made was real. Here's what I want you to understand. My mother's approval does not power my restaurant. It does not make my biscuit recipe better, or my staff more loyal, or my second-year margins stronger. The thing that powers those things is the same thing that has always powered them. The decision I made at 18 to put an application in an envelope and not tell anyone. The 2 years of weekend shifts I worked for $11.50 an hour. The business plan I rewrote 4 times. The Tuesday in October when I sat in an empty room and let myself believe it was mine. My grandmother gave me a starting point. What I did after that was mine. I have a photo of her in my kitchen. Not displayed somewhere visible to customers, just in the back, on the wall near my office door where I see it every time I come in. She is standing in her own kitchen, and she is not looking at the camera. She is looking at something on the counter in front of her, something she is about to make, with an expression that is entirely focused and entirely content. I know that expression. I make it myself, sometimes, when I am working on something new. My prep team has pointed it out. They think I don't know they're watching, but I do. The restaurant is named for her. Not her name exactly, something that comes from her name. A small variation. The kind of thing only people who knew her would catch. Most customers don't know the story. That's fine. The ones who ask, I tell. If you are watching this and you are the person in your family that someone decided wasn't enough, I want to tell you something that took me a long time to actually believe. The people who measured you and found you lacking were measuring the wrong things. They had a ruler that only went one direction and they pressed it against something that went in a completely different direction and called it too short. It was never too short. It just didn't fit their ruler. Build the thing you are supposed to build. Find the one person who can see what you're doing. There is usually at least one, and let them show you. Do the work on the days when it feels pointless and slow and nothing is happening yet. And when the people who left you standing in the driveway finally show up at your door, you will know something they never will. You will know how you got there. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. I used to think the hardest part was being overlooked. I was wrong. The hardest part is continuing to build after the people who should have believed in you have made their position clear. Because overlooking is a one-time wound. But continuing anyway, that is a choice you have to make every single day, sometimes every single hour, in the middle of a shift when you are exhausted and nothing is going right and there is no one calling to check on you. My grandmother understood something that I did not fully understand until I was older. She understood that the way you respond to what happens to you is the only part of the story you actually control. She did not try to change my mother. She did not argue. She just showed up with her car and helped me carry my things to it. That was her answer. Not words, action. And watching her do that one thing taught me more about how to live than any conversation we ever had. There is a version of my life where I waited, where I kept hoping my mother would come around, kept softening my choices to make them more acceptable, kept measuring myself against my sister the way my mother measured us both. I know that version of myself. I was her for a while, and what I know now is that waiting for the wrong person's approval is not patience. It is just a slower way of disappearing. What changed things for me was not a single moment. It was accumulation. It was 3 years of weekend shifts. It was a business plan rewritten 4 times. It was a Tuesday in October, in an empty room. None of those things felt significant while they were happening. They felt like one more thing I had to get through. But that is how real things get built. Not in moments of inspiration, not in dramatic turning points, but in the quiet decision to keep going when stopping would be easier. I think about Mildred all the time. I think about the way she stood behind me and guided my hands without taking over. That is the whole philosophy right there, if you want to call it that. You give someone the starting point. You let them fail. You say again. And then you step back and let what they build be theirs. She gave me that, and the only way I know how to honor it is to do the same for the people in my kitchen. To teach without taking over, to give honest feedback without crushing, to let what someone builds actually belong to them. My mother came to the restaurant eventually. She looked at the room and she said, "You built something real here." It is not the sentence I would have written for her 20 years ago, but it was honest and it cost her something to say, and I received it for what it was. Not as the end of anything, just as a moment. One moment in a long story that belongs to me. The cause and the effect in my life are not complicated when I look back at them now. Every time I chose to keep going, something opened. Every time I chose the harder, slower, less certain path, it led somewhere real. And every time someone told me I wasn't enough, I eventually found out they were measuring the wrong thing. The measure that mattered was the one I kept taking myself. Small, private, honest. Am I better at this than I was last month? Is what I'm building real? Is it mine? Those are the only questions that ever produced anything worth keeping.